I wanted to welcome everybody to our main event today, this live chat about winter bird feeding with the experts from the Cornell Lab's Project FeederWatch team. My name is Ben Walters. I'm the communication specialist for the Cornell Lab Bird Cams program, and I'll be your host today. We also have the Bird Cams project leader, Charles Eldermeyer, joining us behind the scenes. He's going to be answering any technical questions in the chat. He might be answering questions in the Q&A for you as well. So he's sort of our behind the scenes technical man today. So it's good to have him here. We thank him for that. We'll be spending our next hour answering all of those amazing questions that people have been writing in about bird feeding. And to help answer those questions, we have two very special guests joining me today. That is Emma Greig and Heidi Faulkner from Project FeederWatch. Heidi, Emma, go ahead and start your cameras. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Why don't you take a moment to introduce yourselves to everybody?
Hey, Ben, thank you for doing this. It's always fun to do these webinars with you. And yeah, so I'm Emma. I've been managing FeederWatch for 9 years now, long time, and very excited to do this chat with you.
Hey, I'm Heidi. I'm one of the newer project assistants at Project FeederWatch. I've been here just for a little over a year. I've had a passion for birds my whole life, and I'm really excited to help get people as interested in birds as I am and get them excited about our project.
Awesome. Well, thank you two so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know Project FeederWatch is in its sort of super busy season right now, so we appreciate you joining us today. So we're talking a lot about Project FeederWatch to start. I just wanted to get sort of oriented with everybody that's participating with us today about, what their experience is with Project FeederWatch. So I'm going to launch a quick poll just to get us started, and we want to know, what is your experience with Project FeederWatch? Are you a long-time Project FeederWatcher? Maybe you're just thinking about starting, or maybe this will be the first time you have ever heard about it. And in that case, we've got a little bit of information that we'll be going over to help orient you to the project and how you can get started with it. And it looks like we got a pretty good variance here. We have a lot of folks that have been longtime Project FeederWatches, some that are new to it, some considering joining, and quite a few that have never heard about it before. So let's dig into Project FeederWatch just a little bit. Emma and Heidi, can you give us a brief overview about what Project FeederWatch is, how people can get involved, and who's available to participate in this program?
Totally. And wow, it's so cool to see that the even split on the folks in the audience. Welcome to the new folks. Thank you to the folks who have been doing this for a long time. And yeah, for those who don't know what it is, the short of it is a winter bird counting program, November through April. Count the birds around your home, typically around your bird feeder, but you do not have to have bird feeders up to do FeederWatch. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. And the only trick is that everyone counts in the same way. And that way, all of these observations that you make build a gigantic data set that can let us understand what's happening to bird populations over time. And it's been going on for 36 years now. People have been submitting these counts. So it's an amazing data set.
Very cool. So can you give us a little bit into the nitty-gritty of how Project FeederWatch works? Maybe what do people do when they're helping submit their observations?
Yeah, Heidi, you want to give them a little overview?
Sure. So basically, you select 2 days, 2 consecutive days that are your count days. And then what you're doing when you count birds is you are counting the highest number of species that you see at one time but you're not going to add the counts between the 2 days together. So if you were to see 3 blue jays at once on your first count day, but then only 2 at once on your second count day, the total number of blue jays you would report would be 3 blue jays, because that's the highest number you saw at one time. We typically recommend like 5 days between counts, so it's pretty easy to remember. You can just start on the same day every week. But even if you submit just 1 count to us all season, that's super valuable data to us. And again, you don't need a bird feeder to participate. You can count birds that are attracted to like natural plantings, water features at your count site, and you can submit that via our app or on our website.
Awesome. And so Project FeederWatch, when you sign up, how do you provide any resources to help people get started? What's somebody new to Project FeederWatch expect when they're joining?
Yeah, so when you first sign up, you'll go to our website. There is a small participation fee to join, and that covers all of the running of the program. It's really the only reason the program has been able to be alive for as long as it has, is that it's funded by the participants themselves. So that's really a valuable piece of it. And then we will send you a beautiful poster that has Eastern birds on the west, Eastern birds on the west. What am I saying? Eastern birds on one side, Western birds on the other side, and a calendar so you can keep track of your counts. So you get some nice printed materials to really get you going. And the poster is designed to show you what birds you're most likely to see at your feeders. So even if you don't have a field guide, even if you're just getting started learning about birds, you're going to be able to pick it up really quickly, just focusing on the birds around your home using the poster that we send you.
Perfect. And I do really love that poster. It's really beautiful and has really nice pictures of the birds. So a little birdie told me there's a new feature about the Project FeederWatch this season. Emma or Heidi, want to give a brief sort of rundown about this new tool?
Sure. So our new tool is called the Site List tool. So as you can see here, for each site, you can basically see the bird species that you've reported. So when you visit the site list, at the very top there, you will see the total number of species that you've reported, the number of counts you've submitted, and the number of seasons that you've participated in for that site. And so we have 2 sections here. The first is the birds that I have seen at this site. This shows you what you've reported in the current season. The first column shows the percentage of counts this season that included each species. The second column shows the percentage of all of your counts that included each species. And then the third column shows the percentage of counts at sites within about 50 kilometers radius that included each species. And you can sort the counts in a few different ways. But if you look at the bottom of the page, which is the next slide here, this is the birds that you've never seen. So you can see up to 5 species that you have never reported at this site, but that nearby participants have reported in this current season.
Yeah, I love this piece of it the most because it can really give you a clue about what to watch out for. Or maybe you might learn a species that is around, but you didn't quite recognize it yet. So this little thing, you wouldn't think that it'd be neat to learn what you're not seeing, but I kind of think it's the best part of this tool.
Yeah, it's always fun to learn new birds. I always get excited when I'm peering through binoculars, and it's something I've never seen before. So it's always a cool thing to watch out for. So let's move along into some questions that people interested in Project FeederWatch sent in. This first one's from a first-time feeder watcher, and they want to know if there is a best time of day to do their counts.
I would say daytime. I don't know. Heidi, what do you think? I feel like there's not, but maybe you have an opinion. I don't know.
So the only thing, personally, I've seen more bird activity for feeders in the mornings. However, it's really up to participants, like whenever they find that they have time to count. Like some people can do it before work or after work. Some people stick to the weekends. So it's whatever I think the participant thinks is best.
All right. Yeah, great advice. Sometimes you just have to fit it in where you have the time too. So we had another question coming in about this is sort of specific to the protocol about counting birds that you were addressing earlier. They're asking, like you said, if you only count the maximum number of birds that you see at one time visiting during a count, right? So if you see 2 blue jays visiting at one point in time, that's 2 blue jays. But if you see one come, leave, and then another one come and leave your area, that only counts as 1, right?
That's right.
But this person's wondering, what if I know that it's 2 different birds? For example, it's a male cardinal and a female cardinal, but they just weren't there at the same time. Do you still count those as 1 bird?
So like Emma was saying before, we want to stick to the same counting protocol. We want to keep counting everything all the same way. So like if that happened with juncos, you couldn't really tell the difference between males and females quite as easily. So you can't make an exception for cardinals.
Yeah, it would kind of be like counting the species you can tell apart differently than all the species that you can't tell apart. And then you can't compare all these different kinds of birds.
Right.
It's very controversial, this rule. People sometimes get quite annoyed with us, and I can understand because you know that you have 2 cardinals. But from a data analysis perspective, it's so much better to just have everything counted in the same way.
Exactly.
But man, I know, I feel how annoying it is.
Yeah, it's hard not to count the birds are different, but it's good to have a standardized protocol to make sure that everything you're doing has the same observational, no biases or anything like that. So that's a great answer.
And I could go on and on about this question. We can move on.
Okay, another question about observation days. So if there is, say, bad weather forecasted, if there's a big snowstorm or a thunderstorm forecasted for your area, should I be shifting my observation day, or should I still be sticking to the day I planned?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I know the answer. It is don't shift your day, because if everyone shifts their day to when the weather is nice, we only know what comes to bird feeders or your backyard without feeders when the weather is nice. So ideally, people are counting in all kinds of circumstances: good weather, bad weather, lots of birds, very few birds. So if you can bear it, don't shift your count day.
Awesome. Yep. Keep your protocol standardized, like you said. Now we all know it's really fun when we put out our feeders and there's these big flocks of birds that visit and we nearly can't keep them straight. Do you have any tips for counting maybe large groups of birds that are sort of descending on your feeders while you're doing your count?
Sure. So what we kind of recommend doing, it really requires kind of using your imagination. You kind of make a little imaginary block of space, like include about 10 to 25 birds in this block, like kind of gauge how much. And then you try to visually superimpose the block onto the entire flock, estimate how many times it fits, and then you're going to multiply that number by the number of birds in the original block. And then that'll give you about the best estimate, and you can average your results if you want.
Awesome. Just got to do a little bit of mental math there. And then another question came in, and I'm sure this happens all the time to people, especially, if maybe they're not super familiar with all the different species that might be visiting their feeder. Say I see a bird I've never seen before visit my feeder. I rush to get out my field guide, and then it's gone, and you have to do a guess on what species that was. They mark it in their count, and then they go back and they find it was a different species after all that. Can they go back and switch which ID they had for that bird during that count?
Oh, yes, no problem. You can go in and edit your counts and fix mistakes you find, no big deal. So just do the best you can. And as you learn, you can go back and correct if you need to. Nothing to worry about.
Awesome. And sticking with bird identification, beyond the poster, does the Project FeederWatch or the lab have any good resources to help with identifying the birds that visit feeders?
Yeah, so other than that ID poster that you'd get in the mail, we also offer mini posters to download on our website for free. And Cornell's All About Birds website is a great resource which gives helpful information on so many birds, as well as Cornell's Merlin Bird ID app, which is basically like a pocket field guide. And I personally use it all the time. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I love the Merlin app. You can even now identify birds by their sound too, which is
Exactly.
super neat feature. Okay, we have another question about people that are maybe using multiple tools to track their observations. So a lot of people might use eBird. That's another app that the Cornell Lab offers to track their sightings. And they're wondering, can I submit my FeederWatch counts to FeederWatch and also to eBird as well? Or is there conflicting data between those two sources?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and it is kind of confusing, but to clear it up, there is no conflict between the two data sets. The data are all tagged and stored in the same place, but tagged differently. So a researcher coming in to use the data sets will know, these are from eBird and these are from FeederWatch, and they won't get blended together. So no worries entering data into eBird and to FeederWatch. The one little detail I will say is that I believe that eBird counts have a limit of 24-hour period, and FeederWatch counts can encompass a tally across two full days. So whenever you do enter, if you want to enter in both places, just double check and make sure that you're following a protocol that's okay for eBird. Perhaps only put in, 1 day's worth of FeederWatch counts, or maybe put them in as 2 different counts to eBird. That's the only little detail to be aware of, but it's nothing to stress out about.
Yeah, that's a great point. Another question that came in from the audience today was they're wondering, what's all this data FeederWatch is using or collecting used for? And are you ever going to expand that to another season that's longer than the current FeederWatch season?
Whoa, well, that's the question we've been asking ourselves for quite some time. There's a part of me and probably the whole team that wants to expand and be year round. And then a part of me that we can't barely keep up with the emails right now. So I don't know. We don't yet have the capacity to be year round, but there's not a real reason not to do it from a data perspective. It would be great to have data year round. So we'll see down the road. Maybe we can do it down the road. I would love to if we could manage it. And just to address that other thing, what are the data used for? Whatever you can imagine is what they are used for. And you don't have to only use bird counts. You can take the FeederWatch counts and you match them up with weather data from a big weather data set, or match them up with land cover data, or whatever you can think of, and then start asking questions about how do birds relate to urbanization? How do birds relate to the spread of emerald ash borer in woodlands? There's all kinds of questions. How do the birds in your neighborhood change over time? You could do your own little study just of the birds at your home if you team up with a few neighbors. So it's really a wonderful data set because you can use it for all kinds of things.
Awesome. And then we just have 2 more quick things I want to address before we move on to our more general questions that we have, because we've had so many questions today. A couple of things about the FeederWatch protocol. How long do people have to count for? And if you choose a site, how do you choose it? What constitutes a site? And do you have to keep watching from that same site, or can I switch my site?
I'm glad. These are great questions. I'm glad folks are asking. We want to do
I'll
some
take the
of them?
first part. I'll take the first
take it.
part.
Okay, I'll take the second part.
Sure. So it's really flexible for your schedule. Like if you only have under an hour 2 hours, over 8 hours, you can really spend as much time as you want. At first I was intimidated because for some reason I thought that I had to spend like a few hours or like half a day watching, but then I was like, oh, I can spend under an hour. And it was like very attainable, very easy to do. And I actually stayed longer than I thought I would too, because I thought maybe I'll get bored, but I just kept watching and it was just so interesting. So really, it's up to you.
Yeah, and when I have done it, sometimes I just glance out the window every now and then. So I don't even sit and just watch. I'm just kind of keeping a running tally all day long of what I see. And so it almost feels like it takes no time because I'm just doing what I'd be doing anyway, which is watching the feeders.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. And then can you touch base on about the choice, the site choice? Like, how do you decide what area you're going to choose as your site? Like, is it just the feeder? Is it the backyard? And does it have to stay the same place during your counts?
Yes. So you want to choose an area that you can kind of consistently watch over time from whatever vantage point you like. So maybe it's from where you like to sit in the morning and have coffee and read the paper on your phone or whatever. whatever. You look out into the backyard and, okay, this is going to be my vantage point. So the main thing is whatever you choose, it can be big, it can be small. You want to try and do the same thing every time you count. And the reason for that is if you start to record different kinds of birds over time, we want to know that that's because there are different kinds of birds coming to your count area and not because you're counting in a different way. One week you looked in a big area and you counted a lot of birds. One week you looked in a small, you counted only a few birds. Well, no one else knows that you changed the area that you viewed. I hope that makes sense. It's all about being able to interpret the counts later.
Mm-hmm. So consistency matters in that case.
Consistency matters. But the one other little piece of this, which I see is, can you watch at multiple places? Absolutely. You can have one count site at your home. Perhaps you have a feeder at your office. You can do another count site there. Perhaps you spend a few months of the year in Florida, and normally you live in Michigan. You can have a count site in both places. So very flexible in terms of how many count sites you have, depending upon where you're going throughout the year.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is a great introduction to Project FeederWatch. I think those people that may have never heard about it before now have a pretty good idea about what the program is all about. So let's broaden our scope a little bit to some of the more general questions that people were in about feeding birds in winter. First, we want to get a little bit of a lay of the land of our audience. We want to know what your experience is feeding birds. So I'm going to launch another quick poll here. And we want to know if you feed birds year round, if you only do it for part of the year, maybe you used to do it, but you're not doing it anymore. Maybe you're interested in getting started, or maybe you don't feed birds, but you're here to learn. So that's fine too. And not surprising, we have a lot of folks that feed birds that are attending the webinar today. So that's great to see. We have tons of questions to answer, so we're going to get right to it now that we're rounding about halfway there. But before we get started with those, I just wanted to take 1 minute to share that just like with Project FeederWatch, you don't have to have an at-home setup to enjoy watching birds. The Cornell Lab's FeederWatch, or the Cornell Lab's live streaming bird cams, are also a great option for you. Let me stop sharing this. We've got a whole set of feeder cams that you can log on to at allaboutbirds.cams.org/cams and watch them 24/7, 365. You just saw a ruffed grouse on our Ontario FeederWatch cam, which just launched for the season. Right here is the Cornell Lab FeederWatch cam in Ithaca, New York, right by the Lab of Ornithology. Down in West Texas, we've got acorn woodpeckers and woodhouse scrub jays visiting the feeder in the Davis Mountains. And if you ever need of a warm-up, we have a tropical fruit feeder down in Panama as well, with over 70 species visiting today. So make sure to check those out if you ever want a quick break from work or anything like that. You just need a little bird feeder action in your day. Okay, so let's start here with a very broad scope question. Emma, I'm going to give this one to you. Is backyard bird feeding good for birds?
Oh man, this question is so hard. It's like, I've been trying to think, what is this like? Why can I never answer this? And it's like asking, are restaurants good to go to? Sometimes, and for some situations they're great, and sometimes maybe it's not great. And there's not one answer for every species and circumstance. So having said all that, I will also say that the impacts of all the supplementary food that we humans put out for birds, the impacts of that on birds are actually not very well understood. We're trying to get a sense of it. We're certainly trying to get a sense of it through FeederWatch. But in a lot of cases, we don't always know. That said, there are absolutely circumstances under which putting out food and provisioning for wild birds enhances their survival. And that has been shown, for example, in cases where there are real extreme cold snaps. So when the climate is really bad, then bird feeding becomes more important, or perhaps better for birds. Bird feeders can, in some situations, facilitate the spread of disease, like house finch eye disease. I mean, not completely. It's also spreading just within the flocks. But there are circumstances under which, if you see a bunch of sick birds, it's better to take down your feeders for a little while. So sometimes it's better not to, and sometimes it's great to. On balance, I think it's better than it is bad. Let me put it that way. That's our understanding of feeding birds now. But the real answer is that we have so much to learn about this. And that's why I know it, in that chat, it said most people here feed birds. But if you have friends who like watching birds but don't have bird feeders out, tell them about FeederWatch. Because the only way we can really tease apart the impacts of feeding birds on birds is by comparing places that feed them with places that do not. So if feeder watching without feeders will end up being very valuable once enough people start doing it. That's my long and not really even being able to answer that question, because it's such a tough one.
I think you made some great points there, and there's always more to learn, and collecting data on these type of things is going to help us root out those answers. So Project FeederWatch is a great thing to participate in order to help us get those questions answered. So you mentioned that feeding birds in winter, especially those really hard cold snaps, can be beneficial to the survival during winter. We had a few questions about this time of season, and people wanted to know, is it better to maybe prepare for winter, feeding birds during winter a little bit earlier so they can establish that there's a feeder there so they know it's there when the hard times come? Or is there any protocol that you would advise in terms of if people want to just make sure they're offering that food during winter when it can be really tough for some birds?
I don't know that I guess you need a little bit of lead time. If you have no feeders out and you put out a feeder, sometimes people will write and say, I don't have any birds yet. And sometimes I think it's because the birds just haven't found it yet. But then sometimes you put a feeder out and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of nuthatches and downy woodpeckers that you didn't even realize were already living around your home eating other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm a little wishy-washy on that question. I don't know that you really need to prepare, but maybe in some circumstances, in some yards, it might be helpful.
Yeah, you can always test it out and see what works for your space too.
I wonder if it depends on where you are too, because the first year that I put up bird feeders in a different place, it was a more crowded area. It took like a month for the birds to find it. And I am now in a more like spaced out area and they found it immediately. So I see what you're saying with that.
And we had another question about if, during those tough periods for birds when feeders can be helpful, is there a special type of food that you would recommend to make sure you include at your bird feeder to really help them get through those tough times?
Well, the one that comes to my mind that seems real popular in winter is suet blocks, because it's real fatty, and I mean it is fat, and birds really benefit from that in the cold weather. So that would be my go-to. I don't know if you have one, Heidi, that's different.
No, that's what I would have thought too. Yes.
Yeah, suet.
All right, so make sure you get those suet blocks out for the really cold times, help them fatten up.
Yeah.
And then another person was asking about water. We know that, in addition to food, birds need water to survive. Is there anything wrong with offering like a heated bird bath so there's fresh water available during those cold periods?
I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it. It's actually better because it prevents the water from freezing. Just like us, birds need water for bathing and drinking. So this is really helpful. And I just want to add here, just be sure to never add antifreeze because that is poisonous to birds.
Definitely not. And then one last question on this topic. If people are planning on winter bird feeding, but they're not really going to be in town the whole winter, maybe they're going up somewhere for the holidays and they have to start and stop and start and stop, should they just refrain from feeding overall, or is it better to get out those feeders during the times that they're home?
Well, what we know from a few studies on this is that birds don't seem to, at least in the studies that were done, they did not become dependent on bird feeders. So even though it seems like the only thing those chickadees are eating are sunflower seeds because they're always there, they're actually quite aware of other food sources in the area. And if you think about it, birds have not survived by focusing in on one food source, especially in cold climates where food can be very ephemeral. They survive because they know that, I got to find food on lots of different places because at any moment one food source could dry up. So I think you're pretty safe in feeding when you can and stopping whenever you need to, and the birds are going to be able to figure it out. They've already got it figured out. You just don't realize it in most cases.
Awesome. All right, so we've received a ton of questions about sort of the various food offerings that you can give to birds at a feeder. And I want to do sort of a rapid fire session about bird food if we can, to get through a lot of these questions quickly because we have so much to cover today. But first, I think Project FeederWatch has a great resource on your website that you could maybe share with people really quick, because this could answer a lot of people's questions.
Sure. So this is our Common Feeder Birds interactive tool. You can view the bird list, and it basically shows which birds favor which foods. And this is on both our app and our website. You can go ahead and click on a bird, like the American goldfinch, and if you scroll down, it'll tell you the winter regions that it will be in. It tells you the food types that this bird prefers, as well as some of the feeder types that it will prefer as well. And awesome. So, yeah.
We had a lot of questions about people wondering about, we often think, the Cornell Lab, we're located in the Northeast. So we talk about Northeast birds a lot because that's what we see. But we had a lot of questions about all the different regions and what do I offer my birds in this region. Now, that's a great tool to see who's there during that time of year and what are the type of foods that those birds like. So I love that resource, and I use it pretty often myself. All right, so ready for some rapid fire bird feeding questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. First thing, do you have any recommendations for the best all-around food you can put in your feeders for the winter? Maybe we talked about suet was a great thing for those, energy dense, food that we can offer them. But what about recommendations for maybe a seed type that's best at attracting tons of different species?
You do yours and I'll do mine.
I personally was going to choose sunflower seeds because if you look at the Common Feeder Birds interactive tool, like every time I look, it feels like almost every bird to me, they like sunflower seeds. So I feel like if you choose that, you're going to get a variety of birds.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. The black oil sunflower seeds are great for lots of different species. So it's a real good, quick and dirty, pick that one and you're going to be making a lot of birds happy.
Awesome. And what about seeds that you might recommend against? Are there any seed types that you see in maybe those grocery store bird seed blends that you would typically try to shy away from?
Yeah, there's this one that's called Red Milo. It's a larger, very round, large reddish seed, and not many birds will eat it. So if you can see through the bag and see that there's a lot of Red Milo in it, I wouldn't bother buying that. It tends to just be a kind of real inexpensive, but not consumed seed.
Kind of a filler.
Yeah, it's a filler. It really is.
Yeah. All right. And then what about ground feeding birds? Do you offer them the same thing that you would offer in your feeder, or is there a particular food type that a lot of ground feeding birds like?
Yeah, they like sunflower seeds too. I guess what else could you do? You could scatter a bunch of cracked corn on the ground or something maybe that's cheaper and that it doesn't feel like, oh, my precious sunflower seeds. Maybe it's hard to scatter those, but cracked corn, scatter it. No big deal.
Yeah, and I find that my blue jays tend to scatter the food for me as well. So the birds will eat on the ground that as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, you might not have to scatter it.
Right.
All right. And we talked about suet a little bit already, but is it better for people? We had a question come in over email. If it's better for them to make their own suet or use the stuff that you can purchase from the store. And for those homemade types, are there types of fats that you would want to avoid? People wrote in, we had questions about bacon fat, coconut oil, using lard. The typical fat that we use is like rendered beef fat for suet. But is there any sort of fats that you want to avoid offering in your homemade suet?
I think you're supposed to avoid stuff that's got a lot of other stuff in it, like maybe bacon fat has a lot of salt in it, and I don't know what coconut oil has in it or if that's any good for suet, but just generally trying to keep things as kind of clean and pure as possible is good for birds, just because we don't know the impacts of a lot of strange preservatives and whatever stuff is in our food. Well, we don't know the impacts on us, so we certainly don't know the impacts on birds. So that's but once in a while, if you made one suet cake with your bacon grease one weekend, it's probably not a big deal. So just be, kind of thoughtful about it. But again, nothing to stress out about too much.
All right. And another viewer wrote in about mealworms. Are those a good food choice? And they were, do you have any inventive ways of offering them at the feeder?
Yeah, they're a fine food choice. The way I've heard of them being offered is just dried mealworms. Although I suppose people, they put out live mealworms too, don't they, Heidi? I can't even remember.
Yeah. I think there's some places sell specific cups to hold mealworms, but the live ones, but I'm not entirely sure how well they work because I've seen like sometimes if they're not tall enough, the worms can get out, but I've always offered dried mealworms. So
yeah, I'll say when I used to work in a lab and we had birds that we gave them mealworms, I think twice a week in cups. And those were the first things to go. Those are always immediately gobble them up. They loved them. And this is also another popular question. What about that pepper treated seed that helps deter squirrels and other mammals from eating your bird seed? Is that safe to offer birds?
So the ingredient that makes that hot pepper seed hot is called capsaicin. Personally, we don't really know of any research that says that this is okay for birds to consume. We do know that capsaicin can irritate human eyes, so we assume that it would irritate the eyes of birds, but we don't really want to recommend something that hasn't been thoroughly tested.
Awesome. And then lots of questions about non-traditional like bird seed. People asking, can I offer leftovers? Things like mashed potato flakes, like the instant mashed potato flakes, bread, vegetables, corn flakes, fruits like dried raisins and things like that.
I mean, I would say just exercise the same kind of judgment I was talking about with the suet, where you only want to offer things that are free of a bunch of additives and preservatives and stuff that you would feel, oh, this is a healthy thing to eat. That I would err on the side of very healthy things.
Right.
If you're putting it out for birds.
And then one last question. This is sort of thinking beyond the feeder a little bit. How can I find out what native plants are best to offer birds in my area?
One way to do this is to go to your local nursery and ask them about native plants in your area. So you can make a little list before you go, like the amount of sunlight your yard gets, the type of soil, and they can help you decide what plants would be likely to grow as well.
Awesome. And we'll also put a link in the chat that has a good resource from Project FeederWatch about gardening for birds. Awesome. So thank you for filling us in on the rapid fire session about birds feed. Let's switch gears a little bit and think about questions that touch on the birds that are actually visiting, how you can attract more birds or maybe more a diverse set of birds, as well as a few questions that are more geared towards people's specific circumstances. So number one, how come I have fewer visitors at my feeder this time of year? Even compared to last year, I barely have any birds visiting my feeder. What could be causing that fluctuation in bird numbers?
Oh, it's a tough one because you never know what someone's circumstances are. All kinds of things can cause bird populations locally to go up or down. Maybe there was a bunch of construction and habitat change nearby that had an effect on your yard or your area. Maybe a Cooper's hawk has decided to hang out in your backyard and is scaring away a bunch of birds. It's tough. It's real tough to answer that because it really depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, we get this question a lot from the cams as well, with people, wondering, where have all my birds gone? And it's just like, there's so many things that are impacting populations on a year-to-year basis, even on a day-to-day basis, that can have effects on the numbers there. So just keep putting out those feeders and, they'll eventually get some visitors. So this other person wrote in asking about how to balance feeding large birds. In their area, it's magpies, stellars, jays, bigger birds like that. How can I balance feeding them as well as the smaller birds? Because there's no space for the small birds when the large birds are monopolizing the feeders.
So you have a few options in this case. You can consider getting a tube feeder with smaller perches that the bigger birds may have trouble perching on. But you can also have a feeder surrounded by wire mesh large enough for only the small birds to get through. You could do something like this and also have like a platform feeder out for the bigger birds that they could feed on as well.
That's great. Yep. Giving a few different spaces for those smaller birds to access is a great way to lure them in. And then what about people that might not have, a big sprawling backyard to put bird feeders in? Maybe they're living in a more urban environment. They have a patio or an apartment ledge. What type of feeders do you recommend for those situations?
Well, I think one that's kind of cool are those little ones that stick onto the window and are clear. I had one of those for a little while when I was in an apartment, and it was great. You'd see a little guy come right to your window. So that's a good one. And also you can just scatter some seeds right on your window ledge. That's another way to do it without even having to bother getting a feeder.
Yeah. Yeah, those are cool ideas. I like those little window bird feeders. When I was growing up, my mom had one right next to the kitchen window, a tube feeder, and we'd always watch the birds fly up right next to the window. You get a great shot of them.
Yeah, it makes it real cool.
Yeah. So another person wrote in asking about how much we actually know about how bird feeding affects bird populations and movements. We touched on that based on the Project FeederWatch data you were talking about, but what do we know about how bird feeding affects those large scale movements?
Yeah, as I said, there's a lot we don't know, but some of the clues that we're getting, and one theme that is emerging from FeederWatch data, are that a lot of species seem to be expanding their range northward. Now, part of that is also, of course, related to changes in climate and the thermal tolerance of birds. Their thermal windows are moving north because it's getting warmer in a lot of places. I mean, it was 70 degrees in Ithaca last weekend, which is crazy. So there's what am I trying to say? Two potential things that are allowing birds to stay north: warmer climates, but also food available in places where it would not normally be available. And a real cool example of this comes from Anna's hummingbirds on the West Coast. We did a little exploration of FeederWatch data about Anna's hummingbirds, and we were able to tease apart the effect of climate and the effect of urbanization, basically, and found that Anna's hummingbirds were more likely to be present in more urban areas the farther north you got, irrespective of the temperature, which suggests that they're kind of glomming onto people. And it turns out also they were glomming onto bird feeders because people keep their hummingbird feeders out in the Pacific Northwest. So it's really amazing the feedback that you get between the birds and the people putting out feeders, which then keeps the birds around, and then the birds are around, so people are more likely to keep their feeders out. And in the end, you can get hummingbirds hanging out in the snow, which is just crazy, but there's little Annas, they can do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think it's time that we move on to a topic that a lot of people have been writing in about, and that's making sure we're feeding birds responsibly. We talked about the ethics of bird feeding a little bit in terms of like what types of food to offer and things like that. But given that it's such a rewarding hobby, we also want to make sure that we're offering a very clean and healthy environment for the birds, and also be aware of the things that are happening maybe beyond the feeder that could be impacting them. One thing that's caught a lot of people's attention is the recent outbreaks of avian flu that have been reported all over the place, all over North America. And people want to know, is it safe to feed backyard birds when there is an outbreak of avian flu reported? How can I tell if my birds are affected? And how do I even know if it's an issue in my area?
Yeah, well, so the first thing I'll say is to go to the link that I know you're going to provide about this, because that provides a lot of detail about the research that has been done about avian flu and the recommendations for it. At this time, there is no recommendation to cease bird feeding on account of avian flu. And that is because songbirds are very unlikely to either get the avian flu or transmit it. So there's no need to try to keep songbirds away from each other. They're not the ones who are spreading avian flu around. The ones who get avian flu that are of greatest concern are poultry. And also there are other birds like water birds that are more susceptible to it. So the one recommendation that has something to do with bird feeders is, if you have poultry, you've got some chickens in your backyard or something like this, to be extra cautious, you might consider not feeding wild birds, or if you do feed them away from the poultry, in case that rare songbird that has avian flu might spread it to the chickens or whatever poultry you have. So that's the only circumstance under which there's a recommendation to not feed songbirds. What more do I need to say about this?
Then
I don't
one
know,
other
but
thing was
oh,
asking
yeah.
if, how can I tell if my birds are affected? Maybe if you found a dead bird, what to do? You know, should you be telling someone about that?
Yeah, finding whoever are the local wildlife rehabilitation center kind of folks, find that for your area. And that's a way to get local information about what kind of diseases are spreading in your area. And they may have advice about why a dead bird has died. Although usually, I mean, it's hard to know. If you have a fluffed or a sick bird or a dead bird, very hard to know exactly what has killed it without actual necropsy and testing. But
And we should mention too that it's a very low risk of being transmitted to humans. But
extremely
even so,
low.
you don't want to actually physically touch a dead bird or anything like that. You want to make sure you're handling it properly or calling someone that can handle it properly.
Yeah.
And definitely check out the FAQ page there on avian flu if you have more questions. Okay, so moving on from there, thinking about just providing a sanitized, clean, healthy environment for the birds that visit the feeders. How often should I be cleaning my feeders, and do you recommend like a best method for cleaning?
So we recommend cleaning feeders about once every 2 weeks, more often if needed. Sometimes in the warmer climates, it can get a little wet easier. To get rid of any moldy leftover seeds and holes or any droppings. It really helps prevent illness spread. Emma, do you know the best cleaning method?
I think for the most part, hot water and soap is great. You can run stuff through the dishwasher if it's a small feeder that you can do that with. I think this comes to one of the, we didn't really talk about this, but when you're looking to purchase bird feeders, purchasing ones that are kind of simple and easy to clean is a great thing to look for when you're trying to decide what to buy, just so that it's easy to do this and keep those dishes clean for your dinner party.
And should people be cleaning around their feeders as well? For example, you know, we were talking about blue jays spreading seed on the ground for the ground feeding birds. Should they just be leaving that stuff for birds that prefer to feed on the ground, or is that something you want to clean up around the bottom of your feeders?
So it depends. There's, like you said, a lot of ground feeding birds that will clean that up. But sometimes, in some cases, some people do have rodent issues or, you know, rats coming to their feeder. In that case, maybe try to clean it up. You can also leave a tray to catch all of the seeds so that they don't hit the ground, and that can help prevent some issues.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to touch on this last topic before we finish out today. And that is those unwanted feeder visitors that you may be attracting to your setup. We're going to share a short clip of some of the non-bird visitors that we've had visiting our cams in the past. We recently had a raccoon visitor up on our Cornell Lab FeederWatch cam. Got past our baffle system. You know, it's always a struggle. These are very industrious creatures, and a lot of people have problems with them. Squirrels as well, maybe in more urban environments. There's other rodents like mice and rats that can get into feeders, and even bears. You know, if there's people living in mountainous regions or you know, heavy forested regions where there's bear activity. How is the best way to keep these unwanted feeder visitors off your feeders? Do you guys have any advice for people there?
Yeah, so like you said, a baffle can help prevent squirrels, raccoons, and rodents from climbing up your bird feeder poles. I know sometimes squirrels can jump, so sometimes people recommend like making the feeder 10 feet from anything that the squirrel can jump off of onto your feeder, and that'll help. If that's not an option, there's also squirrel-proof cages, like again, with holes only large enough for the birds to fit through. And there's also those feeders that kind of close when a bird perches on it. So if it's too heavy, like a squirrel hanging off of it, then it'll just close the port so it can't access any food.
And then what about people have bear activity in their range? Should they even be feeding birds, or should they be waiting until they hibernate, or what's the protocol there?
Yeah, we recommend just take your feeders down if you've got bears around. There's not really a good way to keep bears away, and you really don't want them getting used to eating bird seed in your yard. So better to take a pause on the feeding, but you can still feeder watch. Don't worry about the feeder watching.
Yeah. Bears are cute, and I love bears, but I don't want them in my backyard. That's for sure. What about, when you're feeding birds, you're attracting a lot of individuals to those feeders, but you're also attracting maybe things that want to eat those birds, like birds of prey. We're talking Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks. What if you see those birds of prey sort of terrorizing the birds at your feeder? What's the best plan of action there?
So I think what we recommend is just trying to take your feeders down for 2 weeks, allow these birds of prey to a chance to disperse and find prey elsewhere. It can also be helpful to plant like bushes or install brush piles near your feeders so that your feeder birds have places to take cover and hide.
So you're going to be giving them a little break, letting those predators move along to somewhere else. That's great advice. Okay, one final question. We had a ton of people writing in about house sparrows. They have house sparrows taking over their feeders and they don't know what to do. They don't want house sparrows at their feeder. Is there anything people can do to keep house sparrows away so they can let the other species visit and enjoy the seed at their feeders?
I always just want to give up when I see this question. They can be so persistent. One thought or one idea that I've heard is you can put crack corn is a good one, some cheap seed out on a platform far away from your nicer feeders near your house and try to just feed them somewhere slightly more distant, because it's hard to really get rid of them. But you can also try and choose feeders that are harder for them to get to. Like you could do little thistle feeders with really tiny perches that only like little goldfinches or siskins can get onto. There are feeders that have like a baffle on the top and then little ports underneath that only things like woodpeckers and nuthatches and chickadees, those kind of birds, tend to eat from, rather than house sparrows. So sometimes the structure of the feeder can help. But yeah, it can be tough, especially if you live in a place where they have some refuge, like if there's a barn next door and you know that they love living in that barn. Well, yeah, you might have house sparrows forever.
Yeah, that's good advice, though. The same advice goes when you're talking about large birds and smaller birds, giving access, feeders that can only provide access to certain types of birds is a good way to try to prevent it, at least if you have any hope. Okay, well, we've just reached 2 o'clock, and I just wanted to start to wind things down here. We want to thank you, Heidi and Emma, so much for joining us, taking time out of your day to answer all these questions from our viewers today. Thanks to everybody that attended today. I think we had up to 1,200 people at one point, so that's such an awesome turnout. Thank you so much for joining us. And anybody that's watching the recorded version of this event, thank you for watching through to the end as well. Just a quick reminder, we'll put up a screen to sign up for Project FeederWatch at Project FeederWatch or feederwatch.org. The season is open now and you can begin counting as soon as you sign up. And you can also watch the cams anytime at allaboutbirds.org/cams if you just need a little break to watch some birds visiting the feeder. Thanks again so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank you, Ben.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.